I've always leaned towards solitude, even as a child. The name's Veronica, and I'm good at staying occupied. Don't misunderstand, I'm not a hermit. I simply enjoy my own space more often than not. My mom, bless her, saw this independent streak in me early. Instead of trying to change me, she nurtured it, guiding me towards something constructive. She introduced me to the art of cooking when I could barely reach the counter, and I absorbed every bit of it like a sponge. Mom didn't just pass down recipes, she taught me the deeper essence of food. We'd frequent cafes and restaurants across town, and she'd explain the intricacies of each dish. As I got older, my interest in food grew. I devoured articles by renowned critics, discovering that food wasn't just about flavor and texture. It was about the presentation, the atmosphere, the full experience. One day, I turned to my mom and declared, "I want to write about food." Her face lit up with pride, and she said, "Then learn everything there is to know, kiddo." So that's exactly what I did. I enrolled in a culinary school, determined to master the craft. But I didn't stop there. I pursued journalism courses to sharpen my writing skills. I wanted to paint vivid pictures with my words, to make people taste the food through my descriptions. My first break came as a critic for a small local newspaper. I reviewed a modest Italian restaurant, describing how the homemade pasta dissolved in my mouth and the fragrant garlic and basil evoked the essence of a Tuscan kitchen. To my surprise, people loved it. My editor called me the following day. "Kid, you've got a knack for this," he said. "Keep it up and you'll go far." And just like that, I found my true calling. I moved from newspaper to magazine, building a reputation for honest and clever reviews. But the real shift happened when I launched my own social media platforms. Suddenly, I wasn't just writing for publications, I was connecting with food lovers around the globe. My follower count grew, and people eagerly awaited my takes on the latest food trends and hidden gems. One Tuesday evening, I was nestled in a cozy corner of the Rustic Spoon, a new farm-to-table restaurant I was reviewing. As I jotted down my thoughts on the ambience, I noticed an elderly couple at the table beside me. The woman was staring at me, whispering something to her husband. I smiled politely, accustomed to being recognized, and returned to my notes. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice warm with excitement. "You're Veronica Miller, aren't you? The food critic?" I nodded. "That's me. Nice to meet you." "Oh, I'm such a fan," she gushed. "I follow all your posts. Would you join us for dinner?" Normally, I prefer dining alone when I'm working, but something about their genuine warmth made me reconsider. I joined them at their table, where the woman introduced herself as Martha, her husband as George, and pointed to a young man sitting with them. "This is our son, Jack," she said. Jack looked up from his phone, his eyes locking with mine. "Hey," he said with a cheeky grin. "Nice to meet you." We quickly slipped into easy conversation. Martha and George were eager to hear about my travels, while Jack cracked jokes that had me laughing unexpectedly. As the night wore on, I found myself enjoying their company more than I thought I would. Jack, in particular, was easy to talk to. We discovered a shared love for obscure indie films and terrible puns. When it was time to go, Jack hesitated. "Hey, would it be okay if I got your number? You know, in case I need restaurant tips or something." I felt a flutter in my stomach, one that had nothing to do with the meal. "Sure," I said. "For restaurant tips." That night, we started texting. At first, it was just food and restaurant talk, but soon our conversations expanded to everything and anything. Our chats became the highlight of my day. A month later, Jack asked me out on a proper date. I said yes without hesitation. Our first date was at a quirky bistro I'd wanted to try. As we sat across from each other, I realized how at ease I felt with him. There was none of the awkwardness that usually accompanied first dates. A year later, Jack proposed. It wasn't an extravagant affair. He knew that wasn't my style. Instead, he cooked dinner, an admirable attempt that ended with slightly charred steak and lumpy mashed potatoes, and asked me to marry him over dessert. How could I refuse? After the wedding, we moved into my apartment. We decided to be practical about finances, opening a joint account for shared expenses. I contributed more due to my higher income, but it felt fair to us. Living together revealed new aspects of Jack. He had a habit of leaving dishes in the sink, clothes scattered everywhere, and the toothpaste tube always uncapped. Coffee mugs multiplied on every surface. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that I wasn't perfect either. "It's just an adjustment," I told myself. We'll find our rhythm. And slowly we did. Jack started picking up after himself more, and I learned to loosen my standards a little. It wasn't perfect, but it worked for us. 6 months in, it was time for our first vacation together. As we stood in the airport, luggage in hand, I felt a wave of excitement. I turned to Jack, eager to share the joy, when I noticed his gaze fixed on something behind me. I spun around to see Martha and George walking towards us, their smiles wide. They had only small carry-ons, looking as though they were going on a short day trip rather than a week-long vacation. "Surprise!" Martha exclaimed, pulling Jack into a hug. "We couldn't let you two have all the fun, could we?" My stomach dropped. This wasn't part of the plan. I glanced at Jack, hoping for an explanation, but he avoided my gaze. "It's kind of a family tradition," he mumbled. "We always vacation together." I forced a smile, trying to hide my disappointment and frustration. "How nice," I said. "But don't we need more luggage for a week-long trip?" George waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, we'll buy whatever we need there. No point in lugging around heavy bags." The first few days of the vacation were a whirlwind. I tried to focus on the positives, the stunning views, new flavor combinations I've discovered, and the friendly locals. But as the days passed, I couldn't ignore how freely Martha and George spent money. They shopped as if money were endless, ate at high-end restaurants, and never seemed to worry about the cost. One evening, while dining at another overpriced restaurant, I couldn't hold back my curiosity any longer. I leaned in and whispered to Jack, "How can your parents afford all this? Aren't they retired?" Jack shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. They're good with money," he muttered, suddenly very interested in the menu. I was about to ask more, but Martha started talking about her bridge club, cutting off our conversation entirely. As our holiday came to an end, I found myself eagerly anticipating our return home. The following day, I decided to check our shared account to see how much we had spent. When I logged in, my jaw dropped in disbelief. The balance was far lower than I expected, shockingly so. "Jack, can you come here for a second?" I called out, my voice tense. I turned the screen toward him. "Care to explain this?" Jack's complexion drained as he examined the numbers. "I may have used our account to help cover some of Mom and Dad's costs," he admitted quietly. I took a deep breath, attempting to contain my rising frustration. "Jack, that's our money I mostly contributed. You should have talked to me before doing this." I know, he said, reaching for my hand. "I'm sorry, Ronnie. It won't happen again, I promise." A month passed and things gradually returned to normal. Jack honored his word and refrained from using our joint account without consulting me first. I tried to move past the vacation incident, focusing on my work and our life together. One crisp autumn evening, Jack returned home, excitement in his eyes. "Hey, Ronnie," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind as I chopped vegetables in the kitchen. "I have an idea. What do you think about an overnight picnic this weekend? Just us, a rented motorhome, and the great outdoors." The idea was tempting. Over the next few days, we prepared for our little adventure. I packed a cooler filled with gourmet sandwiches, homemade potato salad, and a bottle of wine. Jack took care of the details, renting a compact motorhome and planning our route. We arrived at the campsite by early afternoon. The setting was stunning, surrounded by towering pines and a clear, tranquil lake. Jack parked the motorhome, and we stepped outside to enjoy the fresh air. Then I saw it, an all-too-familiar car pulling into the spot next to ours. Martha and George got out, waving enthusiastically. "Surprise!" Martha called out. "We thought we'd join you for your little getaway." I looked at Jack, hoping for a reaction that matched my shock. Instead, he looked guilty, unable to meet my gaze. "Jack," I said, my voice low and measured, "did you tell them about our trip?" Before Jack could answer, Martha was already pulling me into a tight hug. "Isn't this great? A family camping trip." I forced a smile, noticing they once again had shown up without any supplies. No tent, no food, not even a change of clothes. As the evening unfolded, it became clear that our romantic retreat had morphed into a family affair. Martha and George dominated the conversation, sharing endless stories about their past camping experiences. They helped themselves to our food and wine, leaving us with very little. When it was time to sleep, another issue arose. Our small motorhome wasn't made for 4 adults. Jack turned to his parents. "You two take the bedroom. Ronnie and I will sleep in the car. And so instead of enjoying a cozy night in the motorhome, I found myself squashed into the back seat of the car, with Jack snoring in the front. The next morning, stiff and exhausted from our uncomfortable sleeping arrangements, I suggested to Jack that we cut the trip short. The drive back was awkward, filled with forced small talk and stretches of uncomfortable silence. Once we arrived home, Jack's parents said their cheerful goodbyes, completely unaware of the strain they had caused. As soon as they left, I turned to Jack. "We need to talk about this," I said, my tone firm. He nodded, looking defeated. "I know, I'm sorry, Ronnie. I should have told you they were coming." "It's not just about that," I sighed. "It's about setting boundaries, Jack. Your parents can't keep inserting themselves into our lives like this. We need some rules." Jack nodded slowly. "You're right. I'll talk to them." A couple of days later, I was in the kitchen testing a new recipe when the doorbell rang. To my surprise, Martha and George stood there, smiling brightly as though nothing had happened. "Veronica, dear," Martha exclaimed, giving me a quick hug before barging in. "We need your expertise. Can you tell us which restaurants in the city have the best food?" "Well," I replied, caught off guard, "there are plenty of great places. The French Bistro downtown, Le Canard, is amazing, and Sakura's Sushi on Fifth Avenue is top-notch." "Why do you ask?" Martha's eyes twinkled with excitement. "Oh, we were thinking of keeping an eye out for events at these places so we can go and eat for free." I glanced at Jack, hoping he'd back me up, but he just shrugged and said, "Come on, Ronnie, you have to accept my parents for who they are. There's no point in trying to change them." I was stunned. This was crossing a line, wasn't it? But before I could respond, Martha and George thanked me and left, eagerly chatting about their plans to score free meals. A few days later, I was preparing for a review of a new upscale Italian restaurant, Bennett. As usual, I posted about it on my social media to let my followers know when to expect my next review. The evening of the review, I sat down at Bennett, notebook in hand, ready to sample the menu. Just as I opened the wine list, I heard a familiar voice. "Well, hello there." I looked up to see Martha and George grinning at me as they sat down at my table uninvited. My heart sank. Martha picked up a menu and announced loudly, "I'm Veronica's mother-in-law, you know. We're here to enjoy the free meal with her." My face burned with embarrassment. "Martha," I whispered harshly, "please lower your voice. I'm here to work. You can't just show up like this." But Martha ignored me, raising her voice even louder. "Oh, don't be ridiculous, dear. Everyone knows food critics eat for free. Why shouldn't your family get the benefits too? We have every right to be here." I felt the stares of nearby diners on us. The head waiter was approaching, concern etched on his face. This was spiraling out of control. "Martha, George," I said firmly, my voice low but resolute. "I'm giving you one last warning. If you don't leave right now, I will call security. You are disrupting my work and making a scene." Martha's face twisted in indignation. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Well, I never," she exclaimed. "Is this how you treat family, Veronica?" She grabbed her purse, turning to me one last time, her voice dripping with disdain. "You know, I think I made a terrible mistake. I told Jack to marry you. I followed your Facebook, thinking, now there's a girl who'll help us enjoy the finer things. I thought you'd help us get free meals at fancy restaurants, maybe even give us some support. But I was wrong. If this is how you treat family, we're done. We're no longer interested in being part of yours." With that final jab, Martha stormed out of the restaurant, George following her. The silence that followed was suffocating. My hand trembling, I grabbed my phone and dialed Jack's number. He answered on the third ring. "Jack," I murmured, my voice barely audible. "Is it true? Did your mom really push you into marrying me because she thought I could support her?" A long silence hung in the air. Finally, Jack exhaled deeply. "Yeah," he confessed. "She saw what I had and thought you'd be the perfect match for me, for us." It felt as though the world had crumbled beneath me. I ended the call and faced the head waiter, who had been standing nearby. "I'm sorry for the interruption," I said. "I won't be able to finish my review tonight. Please pass my apologies to the chef." As I collected my things, I quickly typed an apology to my followers, informing them that my review of Bella and Nate would be delayed due to unexpected events. The drive back home felt like a blur. My thoughts raced, trying to comprehend everything that had just unfolded. When I entered our apartment, Jack was waiting, his face full of concern. "Ronnie," he began, but I raised my hand to stop him. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Was I just a means to an end for your family all along?" Jack's face twisted in distress. He reached for my hand, and this time I didn't pull away. "No, Ronnie, that's how it began, thanks to my mom. But I fell for you, not because of your career or your connections, but because of who you are." I sank onto the couch, feeling utterly drained. He sat beside me, his eyes full of regret. "I've made mistakes," he said softly. "I should have set boundaries with my parents long ago. But Ronnie, I love you. I want us to make this work. Can we try to fix things?" I looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time. Despite everything, I realized I loved him too. As we sat together on the couch, hands intertwined, I held onto a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could salvage this and come out stronger. The next few months were calmer. Jack worked on establishing boundaries with his parents, and I focused on rebuilding the trust between us. Then the moment I'd been working toward for so long arrived. My cookbook was published. It exceeded every expectation. Newspapers and magazines praised it, and it quickly became a bestseller on major online platforms. One evening, as I read another glowing review, Jack came in with an unexpected surprise. "Let's celebrate your success," he said, his eyes sparkling. "I've booked us a trip to that charming city you've always wanted to visit. Amazing restaurants, beautiful history, and nature, and I got us into that boutique hotel you've been eyeing." I hesitated for a moment before voicing my concern. "It's just us, right? Your parents aren't coming." Jack met my gaze. "I swear, Ronnie, it's just the two of us. No parents, no surprises." When the day of our trip arrived, we headed to the train station, our bags in tow. As we neared the platform, I felt my stomach drop. There, waving energetically, were Martha and George. I looked at Jack, desperately hoping this was a mistake, but the guilty expression on his face confirmed my worst fears. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his eyes avoiding mine. "I couldn't not invite them. Mom found out about the trip." In that moment, something inside me shattered. All the promises, all the efforts from the last few months, they meant nothing. But I forced a smile as Martha and George approached, noticing they had only a small purse with them, no luggage. I asked, already knowing the answer. Martha waved dismissively. "Don't worry about it, dear. You'll handle everything, won't you? After all, we're celebrating your success." As the train's boarding announcement sounded, we headed to the platform. Once everyone was settled, I stood up. "I'm just going to the restroom before we leave," I said, grabbing my purse with my phone and documents inside. I stepped off the train, the cool air hitting my face. I stood there, watching the train slowly pull away from the station. My phone buzzed in my bag, snapping me out of my daze. It was Jack. "Ronnie, where are you?" His voice was panicked. "We're no longer on the same path, Jack," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "I'm divorcing you." I ended the call before he could respond. My hand shook slightly as I opened my banking app and blocked Jack from our joint account. Barely a minute passed before my phone rang again. This time, it was Martha. I held the phone away from my ear as she shouted insults and demands, insisting I pay for their trip and compensate them for emotional damage. When she finally paused, I spoke calmly. "Martha, I'm not afraid of your threats. If you post anything defamatory, I won't hesitate to take legal action." I blocked her number, then Jack's, and finally George's. Taking a deep breath, I called a cab and headed home. The weekend passed in a whirlwind of emotions and practical matters. I packed Jack's things, contacted a lawyer, and began preparing divorce papers. By Monday, I felt drained but resolute. The sound of a key in the lock made me tense. Jack walked in, looking disheveled and frantic. "Ronnie, please," he started, moving toward me with open arms. I stepped back, gesturing to the suitcases by the door. "Your things are packed. It's time for you to leave." His face crumpled. "You can't mean that. I've learned my lesson. I had a huge fight with my parents. I told them I wouldn't pay for them anymore. I'm not even speaking to them now. Please, give me another chance." I shook my head, handing him the divorce papers. "It's too late, Jack. This isn't just about your parents. It's about trust, respect, and the future I want. We're not on the same page, and that's okay. But I can't do this anymore." He stood there for a long moment, then finally nodded, shoulders slumping. Defeated, he picked up his suitcases and left, the door clicking shut behind him. The weeks that followed were tough but freeing. The divorce went smoothly, thanks to my thorough documentation and Jack's apparent acceptance of the situation. I threw myself into my work, finding peace in the kitchen and my writing. As the dust settled, I realized I was alone again. But it wasn't the loneliness I had feared. I rediscovered joy in the little things, trying out new recipes, enjoying quiet nights with a book, and connecting with my followers without the weight of family expectations. One evening, while sipping wine on my balcony, watching the city lights, I couldn't help but smile. Life hadn't gone as planned, but maybe, just maybe, it had unfolded just as it should. I was Veronica, food critic, author, and most importantly, in control of my own future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video. Stay stunned.